Let us pray. O great Spirit, whose voice we hear in the winds, and whose breath gives life to everyone, hear us. We come to you as your many children. We are weak, we are small. We need your wisdom and your strength. Mother Earth, hear your children. Be a bond between the worlds of earth and spirit. Teach us the lessons of the four kingdoms, to learn to walk the path chosen so long ago. From the east, we seek the lessons of childhood. From the south, to learn the ways of questioning. From the west, to grow in acceptance of responsibility. And from the north, to walk in balance and harmony with our mother, the earth. Mother Earth, hear your children. Hold our hands as we walk our paths. Guide us to the lessons we seek. Bring us closer to our Creator. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. I beg to inform the House, in the name of Her Majesty the Queen, Her Honour, the Lieutenant Governor, has been pleased to assent to a certain bill in her office.
The following is the title of the bill to which Her Honour did assent, an act to enact and amend various statutes, lois et dictons et modifiant diverses lois.
I recognize the Government House Leader.
Yes, Speaker. Speaker, I'm seeking unanimous consent that members present for today's proceedings be permitted to speak and vote from any member's desk in the chamber in order to observe recommended social and physical distancing between people at the present time.
Government House Leader is seeking unanimous consent of the House that members present for today's proceedings be permitted to speak and vote from any member's desk in the chamber in order to observe recommended social and physical distancing between people at the present time. Agreed? Agreed. Introduction of visitors. Reports by committees. Introduction of bills. I recognize the Minister of Education.
Thank you, Speaker. I move that leave be given to introduce a bill entitled Coronavirus COVID-19 Support and Protection Act 2020, and that the same be now read for the first time.
Mr. Lecce has moved that leave be given to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Various Acts to Address the Coronavirus COVID-19, and that it now be read for the first time. Is it the pleasure of the House that the motion carry? Carried.
This is a bill entitled An Act to Amend Various Acts to Address the Coronavirus COVID-19. First reading of the bill, premier lecture du projet de loi.
Would the Minister care to give a brief explanation of his bill at this time?
Thank you, Speaker. The bill will amend 5 key areas, key acts: the Education Act, the Planning Act, the Development Charges Act, the Police Services Act, and the Ministry of Training Colleges and Universities Act. I'll address these further in my remarks.
Thank you. Introduction of bills. It is now time for statements by the Ministry, and I recognize the Premier.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you. Thank you. COVID-19 is the greatest threat we've seen in decades. It's an invisible enemy, a deadly enemy. And the fight against this enemy is the test that will define our generation. It's the test that will define us as a people and as a province. And when they look back on this time, we will be judged on how we looked out for each other. We'll be judged on how we looked out after those most vulnerable, those who could not look after themselves. And I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, our enemy is ruthless. It preys on our seniors and most vulnerable, and we must protect them. We're using every tool available to us. We are deploying every resource we have. On March the 17th, I took an unprecedented step of declaring a provincial state of emergency. I did not make this decision lightly, Mr. Speaker. We looked out and looked at our best information we had available to us. We consulted with the Chief Medical Officer of Health. We debated long into the night. And we continue to do everything within our power to stop the spread and flatten the curve. We know this virus is still far from over. We are still facing a clear and present danger. As long as COVID-19 continues to spread, as long as our seniors and the most vulnerable are at risk, Ontario must remain in the position to take any and all actions necessary to fight this virus. That is why we're extending the declaration of emergency by another 28 days. We must continue to restrict social gatherings. We must continue to keep non-essential workplaces closed. We must continue to put an iron ring around our seniors, and we must continue to test the most vulnerable and those who care for them. We must continue to do everything in our power to prevent our hospitals from being overwhelmed, and the extension of the emergency order allows us to keep doing what's necessary. I want to thank all the parties present for supporting us during this critical time. Mr. Speaker, we know that people are struggling out there, and we're taking further action today to help ease the financial burden on the people of Ontario. That's why we're proud to introduce the Coronavirus Support and Protection Act. This act will provide targeted support. My colleagues will tell you more about this important bill in just a moment. Mr. Speaker, when the history books are written, it will be said that the people of this great province never surrendered to the virus. They didn't quit when the going got tough. They didn't leave anyone behind. This crisis, like many before it, has shown what we're made of. We are people who stand our ground. We rise to the occasion, and Ontario will get through this together. Ontario will emerge from this crisis stronger than ever before. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Statements by the ministry. Responses. I recognize the Leader of Her Majesty's Loyal Opposition.
Thank you, Speaker. As I rise to respond to the ministerial statement, I've got a lot of people across our great province in my heart. The public health staff and all of our healthcare workers who are protecting the elderly and caring for the sick. The first responders who help keep our communities safe and healthy. The pharmacists, grocery store staff, farmers, truckers, supply chain workers, all those involved in getting food and medicine onto our shelves and eventually onto our tables. These heroes get up and head to work every day during these dark times so that their friends, their loved ones, their neighbours, and even strangers can do their part and stay home. I think of the kids decorating the driveways, sidewalks, and windows in their homes with encouraging messages for neighbours. This morning I heard of a woman that's putting a riddle out every day on her sidewalk to cheer up her neighbours in her community. Or the teachers who are going the extra mile to make their online lessons fun and compelling for the kids by making entertaining TikTok videos for their students and scouring the internet for educational memes. I think of the businesses of all sizes that are pitching in by manufacturing masks or hand sanitizers, or by supporting healthcare workers with food or discounts. I think of the artists and performers using their art to try to help folks make it through the self-isolation. And I think of the folks who are strengthening their communities by making donations, running errands, and checking in on the most vulnerable. The people of this province are tackling this challenge with bravery and compassion. They are doing their part, and we are here today to do ours, to push for the help Ontarians need to make it through this crisis. People across the province are seeing terrifying outbreaks sweep through one long-term care home after another, as well as assisted living and group home settings. Seniors in care, vulnerable people and their loved ones are anxious about what will happen next, as more residents and healthcare workers in these facilities are diagnosed with COVID-19. All of us are filled with sorrow for those who have lost friends and family members, a sorrow that we know is only deepened because the pandemic has made it impossible for many of us to say goodbye to the loved ones we are losing in person or sometimes at all. But Ontarians are made of tough stuff, and I've been watching over this last week or so particularly as people have found new ways to celebrate. We went through a number of celebrations this past number of days, including Passover and Easter and Vaisakhi. And I listened to the radio and watched on the internet as people found new ways to show their support and love for one another. And I found it quite inspiring to see the unique ways that people reached out to be with family in a virtual way, whether it was on FaceTime or Zoom or other types of electronic opportunities. Folks didn't let the coronavirus distancing requirements stop them from getting together and rejoicing at their family and their loved ones and their friends. And I think that that's what Ontarians are made of. They are people who are going to use any opportunity to support one another, and that is what happened over the last number of days. You know, it was interesting to watch as meals were being cooked and left on porches for other neighbours or family members. It was very interesting to see how the necessity of change that the coronavirus has brought amongst us has also been the mother of invention when it comes to finding ways to connect and support each other. And for this, I was very inspired, as I said, and very moved by what's happened over the last number of days. But that's not over. We have a bit of a journey left ahead of us. I think we all realize that, and it's that spirit that we're going to have to pull up from inside of us and, you know, basically pretend we're having those same kinds of celebrations every single day now until the end of this virus. We will support each other as Ontarians. We will get through this, and I know that Queen's Park is going to have to step up to help people weather this storm, which is why we're going to pass today's legislation that the government has brought forward, and we're going to continue to be pushing for better so that folks in every community in this province have the support that they need to cope with the incredible instability that they're facing. Thanks very much, Speaker. Miigwech.
Responses? The member for Ottawa South.
Speaker, I'd like to begin by thanking everyone out on the front lines, those working in hospitals, long-term care, retirement homes, group homes, grocery stores, pharmacies, first responders, public transit, all those people out there who are taking risks every day so that we can get through this together. Speaker, it's not enough for us just to simply say thank you to all these brave men and women. Our words need to be followed by actions. These are exceptional circumstances, truly extraordinary times that require us to take extraordinary measures. And that's why we're here today, to extend these emergency measures. And there are three things that we must do right now to help those on the front lines. One, all frontline workers should have the protective equipment they need to stay safe. And I'd like to, in particular, thank the Premier for all his efforts in this regard and the people of Alberta for their generosity. Still, not everyone has what they need yet. We know there is more work to do and can't do it fast enough. Two, there are thousands of PSWs, developmental service workers, youth workers, mental health workers here in Ontario, and we now understand the value of their work. These workers are amongst the lowest paid in our province, and we need to adequately compensate them. And we need to do that now because they're taking those risks right now. And 3, and importantly, not all of our frontline workers are covered by WSIB. There are people doing the same work in different settings, and they aren't covered. That's not fair. Frontline workers need to know that if they get sick, if they end up with a permanent disability, or heaven forbid lose their life because of COVID-19, that we will take care of them and their families. And we need to ensure that all frontline workers are covered by WSIB. And we have to figure out some sort of presumptive measure for COVID-19 in that. I want to thank the government and my opposition colleagues for all the work they're doing here and in their communities. It's a pleasure to work with you. We have to keep moving forward. Thank you, Speaker.
Thank you very much. Responses, the member for Guelph.
Speaker, I'm inspired by the extraordinary way people have responded to this crisis. We've learned a lot about how we as Ontarians care for each other. And while this crisis has exposed the fragility and inequities of our social and economic systems, it has also highlighted the extraordinary things people will do to care for each other. This caring spirit should inform our plans to combat this crisis. All of us in this province face tremendous stress. Probably no one more so than the Premier. So through you, Speaker, I'd like to address the Premier directly. Premier, I know that you are working incredibly long hours dealing with unprecedented demands, and I'd like to extend that to the entire Cabinet, Speaker. I want you to know that when I respond to what people are saying to me by putting their demands on the table, it is in the spirit of cooperation and social solidarity. We're in this crisis together, and we must recover from it together. And so while I applaud the Premier for forming a Cabinet Committee on Economic Recovery, giving us a glimmer of hope that, yes, we are going to recover from this crisis, I urge him to include an active role for the opposition. Recovery will not only require a whole-of-government approach, it will require a whole-of-society approach. And that includes the voices of the people who elected all members of this House. Speaker, there are gaps in the government's response to this crisis, and those gaps will be closed by all of us working together, giving everyone in this province, through the members of this House, a seat at the table and a voice at the table, because we were all in this together. Thank you, Speaker, and thank you to the people of Ontario for the extraordinary way we have all responded to this crisis together.
Thank you very much. Motions. I recognize the Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Speaker, I believe you will find we have unanimous consent to move a motion without notice regarding the immediate passage of one bill, debate on a motion to extend the period of emergency in Ontario, and the adjournment of the House.
Government House Leader is seeking the unanimous consent of the House to move a motion without notice regarding the immediate passage of one bill, debate on a motion to extend the period of emergency in Ontario, and the adjournment of the House. Agreed? Agreed. Again, I'll recognize the Government House Leader.
Thank you, Speaker. Speaker, I move that notwithstanding any standing order or special order of the House, that the order of second reading of Bill 189, an act to amend various acts to address the coronavirus COVID-19, may be called today, and when that order is called, 80 minutes shall be allotted to the debate on the motion for second reading of the bill, with 30 minutes allotted to the government, 30 minutes allotted to the official opposition, and 20 minutes allotted to the independent members as a group. At the end of which time the Speaker shall interrupt and put every question necessary to dispose of this stage of the bill without further debate or amendment, and at such time the bill shall be ordered for third reading, and that the order for third reading of Bill 189 shall then immediately be called, and the question shall immediately be put on the motion for third reading of the bill without debate or amendment, and that the motion to extend the period of emergency as recommended to the Speaker by the Premier in his letter dated April 10, 2020, be immediately called and moved without notice, and that the Speaker shall immediately put the question on the motion without debate or amendment, and that in the case of any division on any proceedings provided for in this motion, the division bells be limited to 5 minutes, and that the House shall continue to meet beyond the normal hour of adjournment today if necessary, and that when the House adjourns today, it shall stand adjourned until Tuesday, May the 12th, 2020 at 9 a.m.
Mr. Calandra has moved that notwithstanding any standing order or special order of the House, dispense. Dispense. Is it the pleasure of the House that the motion carry? Carried. Once again, I'll recognize the Government House Leader.
Thank you, Speaker. Speaker, I believe you will find we have unanimous consent to move a motion without notice regarding the appointment of the Information and Privacy Commissioner of Ontario.
Calandra is seeking unanimous consent of the House to move a motion without notice regarding the appointment of the Information and Privacy Commissioner of Ontario. Agreed? Agreed. Once again, the Government House Leader.
Thank you, Speaker. Speaker, I move that in accordance with subsection 4.2 of the Freedom of Information and Privacy and Protection of Privacy Act, RSO 1990 CF 31, Patricia Kassim be appointed Information and Privacy Commissioner for a term of 5 years as set out in subsection 5.1 of the Act, commencing on July 1st, 2020.
Mr. Calandra has moved that in accordance with subsection 4.2 of the Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act, RSO 1990 CF 31, Patricia Kassim be appointed Information and Privacy Commissioner for a term of 5 years as set out in subsection 5.1 of the Act, commencing July 1st, 2020. Is it the pleasure of the House that the motion carry? Carried. Next, we have petitions. Orders of the day. I recognize the Minister of Education.
Thank you, Speaker. Order G189.
Order G189, second reading of Bill 189, an act to amend various acts to address the coronavirus COVID-19. Mr. Lecce.
Recognize the Minister of Education.
Thank you, Speaker. I move second reading of Bill 189, the Coronavirus COVID-19 Support and Protection Act.
Mr. Lecce has moved second reading of Bill 189, an act to amend various acts to address the coronavirus COVID-19. And I look to the government side to lead off the debate and recognize again the Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Speaker, we swore an oath to serve the people of this province, to do what is right, to protect human health, to protect workers' jobs and their incomes, to do whatever it takes to safeguard the people in this province from the sea of turmoil around us. Today we embody the best of our parliamentary traditions, the best of this country, hold the strength of our democracy by coming together to overcome this threat. One people, one country, and one mission, and that is to conquer COVID-19. I'm grateful to the people of this province, led by our frontline workers, for demonstrating a resolve, a determination, an unshakable commitment to win this battle, to overcome this adversity and to emerge from this darkness stronger, more united than ever before, as the Premier has said. And so let that light ignite us all, in all regions of our province, north, south, east, and west, all free people to do their part to overcome our challenge. This legislature and government is reflecting that spirit. Last month, we issued a declaration of emergency and the closure of non-essential business. As Minister, we ordered the closure of all publicly funded schools until April 5th, and then extended the closure until May. And I can assure you, Speaker, those decisions were not made easily. They were not taken lightly, but they were made to protect the health and safety of all Ontarians. Speaker, COVID-19 will create additional unforeseen hardships on students and communities if we do not act quickly. The Premier made clear our government's intent to renew the emergency order for another 28 days, giving our heroic frontline health workers the resources they need to decisively combat COVID-19. To build on this, to build on our actions to date to save lives, Speaker, I'm pleased to rise in the legislature to introduce the Coronavirus Support and Protection Act, designed with one aim in mind: maintain the safety of families and protect the financial interests of households, of our communities, of our schools, and of our future. This bill will help build and protect the public by amending 5 key areas: the Education Act, the Planning Act, the Development Charges Act, the Police Services Act, and the Ministry of Training Colleges and Universities Act. Speaker, we're providing real relief for post-secondary students. This bill will give Ontario students a well-earned break by suspending payments for OSAP borrowers and initiate a 6-month interest-free moratorium on OSAP loans. By temporarily suspending loan repayments and interest accrual, Mr. Speaker, our government is providing immediate support for students during this difficult time. Speaker, we're acting to ensure our schools continue to be built and students remain safe. In the Ministry of Education, we're acting to allow school boards to charge education development charges, or EDCs, on new construction, ensuring a vital source of revenue continues to flow so that we can build schools in this province. EDC bylaws expire every 5 years, and 3 school board EDCs are set to expire at the end of June. This bill would allow school boards to continue using their existing bylaws during the current emergency for 6 months after the emergency's termination to allow EDCs on new projects. The measure will allow school boards to focus on other urgent matters in these unprecedented times, such as ensuring the continuity of learning. An additional amendment to the Education Act would provide a fair province-wide approach to addressing school suspensions and expulsions during this closure period. The amendment would allow principals and boards to carry out investigations and expulsion hearings for those students up to 20 days after the school closure or when schools reopen. Suspensions made under this section of the Education Act are for fairly serious criminal offences. The amendment would help protect the safety and security of students and staff upon the reopening of schools. It will continue to work to ensure students remain learning, an ambitious program that restores teacher-led learning through this province. And I want to echo the message of Leader of the Opposition, of the Premier and Leader of the Green Party, Leader of the Liberal Party, and so many others who have expressed gratitude to our educators for rising to the challenge and working so hard to do what is right for their kids. After all, we took nearly 2 million students into a distant virtual learning in a matter of days. An incredible transformation, truly a collaborative work in progress that's making a difference for our kids. Speaker, this bill provides some much-needed assistance to our municipal partners. More specifically, our legislation will give municipalities the time they need to focus on public health priorities by allowing them to use their current development charge bylaws during this time and for up to 6 months following the end of the emergency declaration. Finally, our government will give municipalities an extension for preparing and adopting a community safety and well-being plan. Mr. Speaker, this bill, coupled with actions to date from hydro relief for families to enhance support for seniors to direct financial support to parents, will deliver the relief Ontarians deserve. It is an action plan to ensure we get through this. It embraces the enduring fortitude and the words spoken through the ages of former Prime Minister Winston Churchill, who expressed to a fatigued nation to, quote, never, never, never give up, and together we will not. Thank you, Speaker.
Thank you. Further debate? I recognize the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Speaker. As I rise to speak to this legislation, I want to start by again recognizing, thanking and celebrating the people of Ontario who continue to act with courage and selflessness each and every day. I know that all of us, both in this House today and in communities across Ontario, extend our deepest thanks to our province's public health staff, all healthcare workers, grocery store staff, pharmacists, transit drivers, truckers and supply chain workers, first responders, and all essential workers, the folks who go to work every day so their friends, loved ones and neighbours can do their part by staying home. Our thoughts continue to be with everyone who is battling COVID-19. We wish them a speedy and complete recovery. We also extend, of course, our deepest condolences to the loved ones of those who have lost their lives fighting this virus. We wish their family and friends comfort, peace, and resilience during this painful time. As the COVID-19 pandemic continues to escalate and upend the lives of folks across the province, the country, and the globe, I'm so proud that Ontarians are continuing to step up and find new ways to come together and take care of one another. We are a community, even when we're apart. You know, people in every corner of this province are feeling the painful impacts of this pandemic on their lives. It is terrifying, heartbreaking and tragic to witness COVID-19 outbreaks sweeping through one long-term care home after the other. We are filled with sorrow for those who have lost family and friends and for those who can't be with their loved ones as they fight this deadly virus. We can't go back in time, and the time to evaluate the preparedness in our healthcare and long-term care system will come later. But the things Ontario has failed to do, we have to do them now. We have to stop workers from working in more than one care home, which risks bringing the virus from one facility to another, causing more deadly outbreaks. We have to start testing everyone in long-term care, supportive and assisted housing, retirement homes and group home settings, and we need to keep testing them regularly so we can catch outbreaks and isolate people quickly. We need to ramp up testing now. And saying the right words is simply not enough. We need every worker in home care, long-term care, and health care wearing protective gear. We need them tested. And we need them paid well enough that they don't need to moonlight at a second facility. Ontarians have seen their lives and livelihoods overturned. With each passing week, desperation mounts. People are seeing their bills pile up. If they managed to scrape together April's rent or mortgage payment, and not everyone did, they're now just 2 weeks away from May's bills, and many are looking at a bank balance that won't cover them. Seniors on a fixed income can't afford more frequent co-payments, and students' OSAP funds are drying up, and their summer job prospects are pretty much nil. Some of our heroes during this crisis are sure as heck not being paid like heroes, like the grocery store staff who make minimum wage and take home less than the federal CERB offers, or the personal support workers who are forced to cobble together 2 or 3 jobs to get enough hours to make ends meet. The federal programs have offered some relief, no doubt, but they've taken too long to arrive. They're too slow to reach people. For too many, they just fall short, while others fall right through the cracks. They need the provincial government to catch them. The NDP will vote in favour of today's bill and allow it to pass immediately. But if Ontario doesn't do more to help, some people will go hungry, and others will go without the medication they need. The urgent economic crisis Ontarians are facing as a result of COVID-19 is causing suffering, and it will only get worse if the province doesn't do its part. And that's why the province should offer a supplementary emergency benefit of up to $2,000 a month for those who fall through the cracks of federal support. We should top up social assistance payments with $300 a month and provide top-ups to low-wage essential workers and families that need more help making ends meet. We need to supply income for students in the form of OSAP grants to get them through the weeks ahead. And finally, we need to offer complete drug coverage for anyone that's receiving emergency benefits. There are other supports for people that this government has still not put into place. This includes a rent supplement, which should be up to 80% of a person's rent, up to $2,500 a month, plus a ban on evictions, an actual ban on evictions that's backed up by law, not just by hopes. Because we all know that evictions are continuing in Ontario. If we are getting the calls, I'm sure all members of the Legislative Assembly are getting the calls. People haven't taken the car out of the garage in weeks, and accidents are way down. Yet many are still struggling to pay full price for their auto insurance because the government hasn't put in place the 50% discount that people are asking for and we believe they deserve. Ontarians were hoping that today's legislation would rescue them from sleepless nights and payments they can't afford. It doesn't. It doesn't do any of those things. It doesn't rescue people. I also want to talk about support for small and medium-sized enterprises. Local businesses, charities, and community-based nonprofits, from shelters to food banks to churches, they're all falling through the cracks too. And this bill doesn't help them either. Shelter organizations and folks that work on the front lines of communities across the province are raising the alarm. The federal government's improved wage subsidy is welcome relief, but it doesn't help with the rent. I want to tell you about someone named Lavender Chan. Lavender reached out to the NDP MPP for University Rosedale because the federal help that was provided simply fails her and falls short for her needs. Lavender's a mom to 2 little ones, and their ages are 1 and 3 years old. Her family opened its first small business 3 years ago, the sushi restaurant called Rolltation. With COVID-19 raging, business has plummeted and Lavender simply cannot pay the rent. She applied to her landlord for a rent reduction but hasn't gotten a response. The penalties she faces if she breaks her 7-year lease are astronomical. Lavender is one of thousands of business owners across Ontario that have zero options and need help now. I also want to point out that COVID-19 has begun to reach First Nations communities, and they desperately need help from both the federal and provincial government to fight this pandemic. The members of this House know far too well that from Fort Hope in the north to Six Nations of the Grand River in the south, many First Nations communities were already dealing with crises in healthcare outcomes, adequate quality housing, safe running water, flooding, and so much more before COVID-19. Now is not the time to play jurisdictional ping-pong with the federal government. The folks in these communities live within this province. This government has to step up and provide First Nations communities with the support and the resources they need to fight this pandemic. The people of the province are counting on us to get this right. They're counting on us to give frontline healthcare workers and public health staff the support they need to keep themselves and Ontarians safe. They're counting on us to make sure the most vulnerable are protected, to provide concrete financial supports to workers, families, and small businesses, and to take the steps necessary to safeguard our province's economy, so that all Ontarians, no matter their income, their age, their occupation, or what corner of the province they call home, are able to not just weather this storm, but make it through ready to build and rebuild their lives in our province's economy. We can do this. We can support our healthcare heroes by ensuring that they have the resources, protection, and staffing they need. We can make sure that every worker, family, and small business in Ontario has the direct financial support that they need to make it through this crisis. We can ensure that the most vulnerable amongst us, from seniors to long-term care and home care, seniors in long-term care and home care, to people that are homeless and living in shelters, to rural, remote, and First Nations communities, are supported and protected during this pandemic. Every day, I'm flooded with stories of Ontarians leading, supporting, and amplifying efforts to strengthen our communities and look out for each other. From the kids putting hand-drawn messages in their windows to encourage their neighbours, to the folks at charities and nonprofits who continue to be helpers, to the businesses of all sizes that are contributing whatever they can to support their communities, to everyday folks who are staying home to save us all. The people of this province are meeting this crisis with kindness, with courage, and with selflessness. They're doing their part. Now the government needs to do its part. Thank you. Merci. Miigwech.
Thank you. Further debate, the member for Ottawa South.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and it's a pleasure to rise today and say a few words about this bill. And I want to start by saying thanks to all the children in Ontario. Hopefully you're not watching this channel right now, you're on TVO, but you're helping a lot. You're helping a lot by encouraging all of us. And I'm going to tell you a funny story. My daughter had to drive around the block to drop something off at a neighbor's house on the step. She had Fraser, our grandson, in the car, in the back seat, and he's saying, "It's taking too long." And she's going, "Fraser, we're just going around the corner." He said, "It's taking too long." And he kept going. And then she says, "Fraser, what is it?" He says, "COVID-19, it's taking too long." And today, sorry Fraser, we're extending another 28 days. That's how we all feel. It's not easy to be away from the people who we love, whether they're our grandchildren, our brothers, our sisters, our mums and dads. It's not easy. It's not easy. It's not easy for any of us. It's not easy for any Ontarian. And that's why we all have to pull together and work together. And that's why we're going to support this legislation today. There are important administrative things that are going to help our partners, that are going to protect students. They're good things. They're forward-looking. There's no sense looking in the rearview mirror right now. We can't look behind us. There's no time. There's no time for that at all. We'll have a time to do that sometime from now. And we'll have to do an honest assessment of how we've responded. But we can't do that right now. What we have to do is move forward. And we know the advice of public health, which tells us to stay home, practice social distancing, wash our hands. If you're vulnerable, you're over 70, I'm not there yet, thankfully, or you have a compromised immunity system, stay home, isolate. That's how we're protecting all those people on the front lines as well, too. So we need to keep our eyes fixed on what's in front of us. We have to look forward. Last week, I hosted a town hall, teletown hall. I know some of us are doing it here, and I want to thank the Board of Internal Economy for making sure we're able to do those things and making such a quick decision. And I heard we had about at any one we had 2,700 people on the call at some point, 1,000 people, a lot of people. And overwhelmingly, I heard these three things. They're concerned about their personal health, they're concerned about personal and financial health, they're concerned about long-term care, and they're concerned about testing. And those are genuine concerns. And they express them. So our job here is to try and express those to all of us here so we can take some action. And I appreciate all the work that people are doing. In long-term care, you know, we talk about flattening the curve. I think we all feel like we're behind the curve. And that's not a criticism. The question is, how do we get ahead of that? And it needs to be clearly articulated to people how we're going to do that. It hasn't been. And I know there are great efforts there, but people need to understand that. People need to understand how we can better prepare for what's happening in long-term care and retirement homes. And there's been some great suggestions by the RNAO about what we need to be doing there. I know the government's followed some of those things and taken them on, and that is great. We need to do all of them. You've done great things like look at foreign-trained professionals. That's important. Ensuring that PPE gets there. It needs to get to every setting. That's what we're hearing from people. That's what they want. We're all affected by this. We all know that we can't do it fast enough. But we have to try. We have to try to be bold and take those measures that right now might seem like looking at how we're paying those people who are caring for the people we care for most, because it's important and they deserve it. And the benefit of that is it's going to create some stabilization in the workforce and achieve some of those public health guidelines that are being put forward by our public health experts. So I think we all know what we have to do here. And I kind of hope the kids are tuning in. And here's why. Because this is the way that we should work all the time. It is. And maybe that sounds Pollyanna, and I've been accused of that before. But that's the way that things should be. And that's how we have to continue to work through this, to support each other, to support all Ontarians, and ensure that we all come through this together and nobody gets left behind. Thank you, Speaker.
Thank you very much. Further debate? The Minister of Transportation.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's an honor today to speak in this chamber to support this bill protecting all Ontarians, as well as to thank those working so hard on the front lines to make sure that we have everything we need. We all see that in these extraordinary circumstances, we have extraordinary heroes. They're doctors, nurses, and other healthcare professionals in our hospitals and in our medical centers, in our long-term care facilities, and elsewhere. Truckers, people working in supermarkets, shops, as well as those working in public transit. We're also talking about business owners who raised their hands and gave us different PPEs when we needed them to make sure that we have a proper supply chain and help those on the front lines. Of course, Mr. Speaker, we're also talking about volunteers. We're thanking them. Thank you. Thank you for your time, your efforts, day after day, helping us to get through this. You guys are real heroes. Us politicians were here in this extraordinary session of the Legislative Assembly, smaller group than usual, and this is on purpose to make sure that we can have physical distancing. And we're asking for 28 more days of emergency status so that the real heroes can keep on making sacrifices for us all. As for the citizens of Ontario, we have to make sure that we keep following the guidelines established by the Chief Medical Officer in Ontario. And it's essential to make sure that we flatten the curve and to protect the most vulnerable in our society. It's also essential to protect first responders. This bill today will add to the measures that have already been announced and that will help us to get through this difficult time together. This bill will contribute to protect the population with 5 key different acts. We're modifying the Act on Education, on development charges, on police services, on planning, and on the Ministry of Training, Colleges and University. The measures that are proposed will bring real help to school boards and to municipalities in managing the emergency created by COVID-19. It will also bring our students a very important support. These measures are essential. And that is the reason why it is essential for all members to support them. The bill that we are proposing will add to the measures already announced, aiming to help us go through these extraordinary circumstances. I'd like to tell you about certain measures that have already been announced over the past few weeks. We've announced an action plan of $17 million to fight COVID-19. There will be $10 million for individuals and businesses to help with liquidity, to protect jobs, and protect our family budgets. $3.3 billion to help our healthcare system, as well as more investment to protect people in employment. We want to make sure that we'll have the resources necessary to fight COVID-19 and protect people's health and finances when they need it. This crisis has shown hidden heroes among us, and I would like to talk about a group of heroes that we all know very well, truckers. Thanks to our truckers, we have food and products in our supermarkets. They are working long hours, day after day, night after night. They deserve our respect, our support, our thanks, and our best efforts to help them. And that is the reason why we have asked everyone to support our truckers when they stop to rest, to eat, or to fill up their tanks. And that is the reason why we have more places where truckers can stop safely to rest. We would like to thank our partners in the private sector for their help. Mr. Speaker, these are measures that are added to the ones we've put in place at the beginning of this crisis to help with social distancing. Mr. Speaker, to all of those working on the first lines, we'd like to tell you that your health and your well-being are our priority. We are listening, and together we will get through this. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much. Further debate, the member for Niagara Centre.
Thank you, Speaker. I'd like to take a few moments to speak to the municipal amendments in this bill, and of course we support those items which provide some flexibility to municipalities. The development charge bylaws, I believe there are almost 20 municipalities whose development charge bylaws will expire shortly, and providing them with a 6-month window to continue to collect those important development charges that support soft services in municipalities across Ontario is very important, and we appreciate that change. As well as Schedule 4 with the changes to the Planning Act, with municipal councils meeting remotely and dealing, of course, with much more important issues, it's important to extend that period of time that councils have to act on planning decisions before they're automatically referred to the LPAT. But we've been hearing, Speaker, that municipalities are bleeding cash, and we know that revenues are down from things like transportation and fees. Expenses are up as municipalities deal with this crisis, and they're worried about going into the red. Municipalities cannot run deficits, and so they will need more assistance in the long term than they're getting now. And the government, I think, has heard people on this side of the House talking about how if there is any kind of a committee that deals with recovery, that we all parties need to be a part of that committee so that we can have input. Some of the input that our leader has put forward and that we support would be for municipalities that institute property tax deferrals should be able to ensure the flexibility to defer their remittance of property tax to the province. And that would provide some breathing room for municipalities, Speaker, and we believe that should be in this bill, and we hope that the government considers that in the future. We should also provide 100% provincial funding to public health units. Currently, municipalities are paying 30% of those costs. And what better time than now in this crisis for the province to show that they are partners with municipalities and to support municipalities by footing the cost of public health units and people on the front line, Speaker. There are other jurisdictions like Denmark who are moving forward with plans for recovery, and like businesses, municipalities don't want to find themselves behind the 8 ball when it is time for us to think about recovery. And so I hope that the government will, moving forward, consider some of these recommendations that are coming from this side of the House. And in the last few moments, Speaker, I would just like to, I believe on behalf of all members of this legislature, extend the deepest condolences to the family of Councillor Mike Chofie from Pelham, who passed away on Sunday after testing positive for COVID-19. I want to thank the Leader of the official opposition and the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing for recognizing him on social media yesterday. He leaves behind a wife and 2 daughters. He was a wonderful community activist and a great councillor, and he'll be deeply missed. Thank you.
Thank you. Further debate, the member for Guelph.
Thank you, Speaker. It's an honour today to rise to speak on this bill. And before I begin, I just want to take a moment to thank the frontline healthcare workers, the drivers, the delivery drivers, the transit drivers, our long-term care workers, our teachers. My children have received their homework, much to their displeasure, but they're working hard at it, I hope, as we speak. I want to offer my condolences to everyone who we've lost in this crisis. And I know we all feel it, and I think sometimes where I most feel it is when I go do that thing that we all do every week and go grocery shopping, and you can see it in the eyes of everyone who's also shopping, and you can see it in the eyes of the people at the store. There's like this fear, but yet deep desire to connect with each other. And it just shows you the everyday heroes that we experience as we do some of the most mundane things day to day in our lives. And so I also want to say I appreciate the actions of the government that they've taken to help flatten the curve and, frankly, save lives. And I want to thank the people of Ontario who are staying home and practicing physical distancing and saving lives. You know, I have little doubt that the government, with a bit of pushing from the opposition and others, are doing everything they can to make sure we ramp up the amount of testing we do in the province, to make sure that everyone, our frontline healthcare workers, those who work in long-term care homes, those who work in any homes, whether it's supportive housing, housing for disabled, people of all abilities, to have the personal protective equipment they need. Frontline officers, I'm starting to see more delivery drivers having access now. It's so critically important to get that in the hands of everyone who's working on the front lines in our province. I think the Premier and the Prime Minister deserve compliments and kudos for the clear way they've been communicating during this crisis, being transparent with the public about what is happening and the urgent priorities to flatten the curve and save lives. And so in many respects, that means quarantining partisanship in this House. And so I'll be supporting this bill, supporting the fast passage of this bill like the other opposition parties. But, Mr. Speaker, I also want to talk about some things that I feel are missing from the bill as well, because I think it's important to hear from those Ontarians who want us to come and fill in the gaps. Because unfortunately, even though the federal government has acted, there are a lot of Ontarians who are still falling through the gaps. I'm hearing from people who don't fully qualify for the CERB payments. I'm talking about people who need additional mental health supports. I'm talking about small businesses who don't know if they're going to keep the doors open after May 1st when the next rent is due. And I'm sure the government's hearing those concerns too. So, Speaker, the problem's not what's in the bill. What's in the bill is good. It's good. The challenge is what's not in the bill. And that's what I think we need to address when we come back next month, if it's not too late for some folks. And I received an email, and I want to read it from a constituent of mine who I think really captures how some people are falling through the cracks. I want to quote, "I'm a single mom that has a 20-year-old daughter that is dependent on me, as we both are victims of domestic violence. Her mental and emotional health is very unstable at this time. She was in trauma counseling. She's also an essential service worker, and with the reduction of hours at her employment, she only works 10 hours a week. She doesn't qualify for EI benefits, nor does she qualify for the CERB. Now, with the loss of one of my positions, there's not enough to pay for rent, car payments, food, and any of our bills. I'm not sure where to turn or who to turn to at this time. Everything that I've read online doesn't qualify my daughter or myself. I'm reaching out for help." So I want a bill that's going to help the people, and she's not the only one, the people like her across Ontario. We need direct financial payments for people who don't qualify for the CRB. We need direct financial payments for people who are on social assistance to top them up to the CERB, because I can tell you, so many people I know on Ontario Works, Ontario Disability Support, they would get by doing odd jobs here and there to bring in a little extra cash, or they would go to places like Hope House in my riding to get lunch as a community. Those places are closed. Those job opportunities no longer exist, but those people still need to eat. They're our neighbors. You know, we're fortunate that landlords are mostly being pretty flexible with rent, but we can't rely on goodwill alone. I've talked to small business owners who don't know if they'll be able to maintain their business. You know, we know the Amazons and the Walmarts of the world are going to survive this crisis, but I want our downtowns to survive this crisis. I want the businesses that make our communities so vibrant and vital to survive this crisis. And I don't know if they're going to be able to reopen if they don't get rent support for May 1st, certainly not if they don't get it by June 1st. And so I know the Premier likes to talk about Ontario being open for business. I want to make sure our small businesses can reopen when we emerge from this crisis. I want Ontario businesses, local businesses, independently owned businesses to be open for business when we recover from this pandemic. Speaker, I want to echo my colleagues' calls for support for municipalities. I've been meeting with mayors who have talked about the fact that they're losing millions of dollars in transit fares, parking fees, and others sources of revenue. There's a lot of people who are not going to be able to pay their property taxes over the next little while. And we know that municipalities provide essential services. We have to keep our transit going. We have to ensure that our public health units are fully funded and operating now more than ever. Do we need them? And all the other vital services that municipalities play in our communities. And so when we come back in May, I want to make sure that we have a relief package for our municipalities. I want to finally say that when we come back for May, and I see the ministers here, that we provide more than $12 million of extra funding for mental health supports. I can tell you the people reaching out to my office, and I'm sure everyone's office in this House, the need and the demand to provide additional mental health supports is huge. And we're going to have to step up and support and help those people. And I know we all care. I know we all care. And so let's provide the funding that's needed to provide the mental health supports that the people of Ontario are going to need. Speaker, we will emerge from this crisis because of the spirit of the people of this province, their courage, the extraordinary way in which they're caring for people. And I believe the government, everybody in this House, we have to step up and ensure that we provide the helping hand that's going to ensure that nobody falls through the cracks because of COVID-19. Thank you, Speaker.
Thank you very much. Further debate, the Solicitor General.
Thank you, Speaker, and may I channel you for a moment and thank the Legislative Assembly staff who have ensured that our debate can continue here safely. So thank you very much. I also, as Solicitor General, want to personally thank the Solicitor General staff. Deputy Commissioner DiTommaso, Deputy Commissioner Deborah Richardson, and your staff are literally working around the clock. We are, by our very nature, an operational ministry. Police, First Nations, municipal partners, corrections, animal welfare, the firefighters, the Emergency Measures Ontario, did I say corrections officers? Because they are so critical. It is incredible to me to see the professionalism and to see the commitment that your staff and you have given in support of the people of Ontario. So thank you, thank you, thank you. As we are here, I would like to provide more details on the proposed legislative amendment to the Police Services Act. Currently, the Police Services Act requires municipalities to develop a community safety and well-being plan by January 1, 2021. These plans require municipalities to work across a wide range of sectors, such as policing, health, and social services, to develop proactive strategies that will address local priorities related to the safety and well-being of our Ontario citizens. However, given the current global public health emergency, we must ensure that municipalities and the sectors they are required to work with can focus their attention on maintaining public safety, containing the spread of COVID-19, and treating those who have become ill with the virus. We have also been working closely with municipalities as they respond to the impacts and ramifications of the COVID-19 outbreak and the effects it's having on Ontario communities. In our discussions, municipalities have raised concerns regarding the January 1, 2021 deadline and have asked to delay the existing timeline. The bill that we have proposed in the legislature today would amend the Police Services Act to allow a new deadline to be prescribed in regulation for community safety and well-being plans to be completed. This will give municipalities an extension for preparing and adopting these plans so they can focus their staff and resources to address the COVID-19 outbreak. And I want to raise very briefly, there was some concern about why we didn't prescribe a date. Frankly, we didn't prescribe a date because we do not know when this pandemic will be finished. So prescribing it in regulation allows us the flexibility and the municipal need for flexibility while the pandemic occurs. While the community safety and well-being plans are an important tool for municipalities to keep our communities safe in more normal times, We need to focus on allocating resources where they are needed most, right now, and that is to stop the spread of COVID-19. The safety and well-being of all Ontarians is our government's top priority, and we will continue to take decisive action to protect everyone who calls Ontario home. Thank you.
Thank you. Further debate? The member for Spadina-Fort York.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's an honour to rise in the House today, especially during this pandemic and these important times. And I just want to start my remarks by thanking all of the healthcare heroes out there, the doctors, the nurses, the personal support workers, the technicians, the cleaners, the administrators, all the people who were taking care of the elderly and ill before this started, and who are looking after the people through this pandemic and putting their own health at risk. So I want to thank them. I want to thank the essential service workers, and I want to start with the farmers, because that's where the food that we're eating starts, with the truck drivers who deliver it, to the grocery store clerks, to the social workers, the food deliverers, the cooks. I want to also reach out and thank all of the community members who are doing what they can, calling their neighbours, sewing masks, sewing masks and cooking and delivering meals. Especially this past weekend, I saw many people out there cooking meals and reaching out to people who were unable to cook, or just reaching out to provide some warmth and comfort and letting others know that they are there for them. Like the other opposition members mentioned, we are going to be supporting this bill, and my role as critic for colleges and universities is to point out the things that need to be done. The 6-month OSAP relief is absolutely vital, and it's an important first step, but there are many other steps that need to be taken to support our post-secondary sector and our students. Ontario's colleges and universities are stepping up during this crisis. There are healthcare students who are fast-tracking their training so that they can get on the front line, and there are other healthcare students who are supporting their future colleagues by providing meals to them while they're working long shifts in the hospitals. Student residences are being used as shelters. Some students are 3D printing face shields to protect our frontline healthcare heroes. Research labs are isolating COVID-19 and working on a vaccine. And they're also offering their lab services to increase our level of testing, because the World Health Organization says that we are not going to be able to start reducing the restrictions on us until we have a thorough testing, tracking, and isolation regime in place. So our universities and colleges, our public universities and colleges in this province, are stepping up during this crisis. They have been, not just during this crisis, but they have been the foundation for the success of our 21st century economy in this province. We have the fastest growing IT sector in North America, and a lot of that is due to the innovation centres and the research work that takes place at our public colleges and universities. But the success that they've achieved and the contribution that they've made to our success in Ontario has not been rewarded with funding. We have the per-student funding in Ontario is 40% lower than the Canadian average. Our students, our college and university students, face the highest tuition fees and the highest student debt levels. And operating grants have been flatlined for a decade. That equals a $2 billion inflationary cut. And then just a year ago, the OSAP grants were converted to loans, and there was a $670 million cut to operating grants for our post-secondary institutions. So now that we're in the middle of this pandemic, we are entering it with already underfunded post-secondary institutions, and we need the government to step up. And there's a number of things that that I'm hoping will come in the next time we meet in May. There needs to be an increase in OSAP to make up for the money that students are not going to be able to earn because of the loss of summer jobs, and their parents also lost their loss of income, so they're not going to be able to contribute. We want those to be grants. They can't be loans. Our students are already deeply indebted. We know the research shows that student debt and the cost of university and college is fueling the mental health crisis on our campuses, and we can't add to that fuel right now. We can't add to that mental health crisis. We need emergency relief fund to help students just to meet basic urgent needs. We need to increase the operating grants to our universities and colleges so that they can transition to online learning and because of the expected loss of income from students who won't be able to return, and in particular from international students. We need to cancel the math proficiency test. This is holding up the licensing of teachers who should be able to start work in September in our schools or online, however we're delivering it, but we need to cancel that math proficiency test so that they can begin teaching as soon as possible. We will bounce back from this, and in order to bounce back, we need to protect our post-secondary, our public colleges and universities. And I'll just mention that in 1921, just a few blocks from here, Banting and Best discovered insulin in one of our public universities. That vaccine for COVID-19 could also come from one of the labs in our public colleges and universities. So we need to support them, and we need to support the students. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Further debate? The member for Scarborough-Guildwood.
Thank you, Speaker. It's my pleasure to rise today on behalf of the people of Scarborough-Guildwood. And indeed, Speaker, we are in this together. The measure of a society is the way that it treats its most vulnerable. When I last rose in this chamber, I spoke about the urgency of the moment. I shared the devastating news that 2 residents of Seven Oaks Long-Term Care Centre in my riding of Scarborough-Guildwood had sadly passed away from COVID-19. And in just a few short weeks, Speaker, the situation has become even more dire. 22 people have now passed away at Seven Oaks, and my heartfelt condolences to those families as they are grieving at this time, and the staff who care for them. But the Speaker, the situation is even more distressing. 82 more confirmed cases are in residence there, as well as 14 confirmed staff. This outbreak is not limited to one facility. There are outbreaks in 82 long-term care homes peppered across this province. All of us in this room are impacted by this virus. Today, we must stand together and do all that we can with a spirit of urgency to protect our constituents and especially those who are vulnerable. The elderly have given so much to our province and to our communities, and we feel this loss keenly. If what we are doing is not working, we have to stop and we have to rethink. We urgently need to do more to protect vulnerable populations and the staff who care for them. And I see that the province is taking steps such as doing more testing of these populations. But we need to do more, and we need to move much more quickly. Preventing the spread of COVID-19 in these facilities will directly translate into lives that are saved. Residents in long-term care facilities do not have the same options as everyone else in the general public to protect themselves. Public health advice to stay at home, to self-isolate, to cough in your sleeve, to do all of these things are meaningless in those facilities because they are already at home. They need the staff who care for them where they live to be healthy. And the staff doing rigorous testing, they also need to feel protected. So personal protective equipment is essential when working in these facilities, not after there is an outbreak, but every day. Many facilities are struggling to meet their staffing needs. Many workers have already become sick themselves, and those who have not, they worry about bringing this virus home to their families. Staff who relied on income from working at more than one job at multiple sites will feel the impact of this virus right in their bank accounts. In addition to increased funding for long-term care sector, the government has set aside $1 billion in contingency funding, and this funding is designed to respond to the pandemic. It should be proactively used to protect people in long-term care and other congregant settings. In order to attract and to retain staff, the government should immediately and retroactively implement hero pay for all staff at long-term care homes by giving them an immediate raise of $4 an hour. The high risk that these workers take on in order to provide the care and support for our society's most vulnerable should be valued and rewarded. Speaker, we also need to listen to those working in home care, because it's a system of care. And home care workers are equally as exposed because of the intimate work that they provide to people in need. And so they too need personal protective equipment, and they urgently need a system of testing so we know what the risks are in those home care settings. Under the Emergency Measures Act, Speaker, the province has the ability to appoint a single person who is responsible for vulnerable people in this province. And I urge this government to use the tools at their disposal and appoint that individual and make it known to the long-term care, the home care, the community care, the congregant living settings and group homes that are in this province, as well as those who are in transitional housing and emergency shelters, so that vulnerable groups have the protection that they need. And finally, Speaker, I want to talk to the students of this province. And I know that my colleagues on the other side have spoken very well to the importance of those in our universities and our colleges. One of the things that we have to be careful about is unintended consequences. And usually from May to May is when the leases are signed. So we need to make sure that our students are not caught in further debt because they cannot honor those leases if their schools move to virtual learning in the fall. These are just some of the things that the government can do, that it is in the capacity of the government to do during these times. And yes, Speaker, we can and we should do more as urgently as the situation of COVID-19 demands. Thank you, Speaker.
Thank you very much. Further debate, the member for Milton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it is an honour to rise in this House and to speak to this important legislation, Mr. Speaker, and also to serve with our Premier and the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing and all of my colleagues on both sides of the House, Mr. Speaker, during this unprecedented time in Ontario's history. As everyone in Ontario knows, the current situation is not business as usual for anyone, Mr. Speaker, and that includes our municipalities. That is why we're proposing legislative changes to two acts, Planning Act and Development Charges Act, Mr. Speaker. First, I'll outline proposed changes to the Planning Act. An increasing number of municipalities are responding to COVID-19 outbreak by diverting resources to essential services, instructing non-essential staff to work from home, or suspending in-person meetings. We are proposing to give our municipal partners the time they need to focus on local public health priorities by temporarily suspending planning decision timelines. Currently, when someone applies to change a planning document or to develop or divide land, municipalities and planning boards have specified timelines to make a decision before the applicant can appeal it to the LPAT. The changes proposed today would allow the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing to temporarily pause the need for municipalities and planning boards to make decisions within these timelines without the risk of appeal. This responds to requests from municipalities and would help them better manage staff time and resources in order to direct them to more urgent needs at this time. This would apply to all Ontario municipalities and planning boards. However, municipalities that want to continue to process planning applications, hold virtual or electronic public meetings, and make decisions during this time can still continue to do so. Next, Mr. Speaker, I would like to highlight our proposed changes to the Development Charges Act. Our government believes that growth should pay for growth, and we want to ensure municipalities have the tools they need to build complete communities. Municipalities are allowed to make builders pay development charges on new construction to help with the cost of growth-related infrastructure, such as roads, water, wastewater, police, and fire services. To levy development charges, municipalities need to have a bylaw in place which must be reviewed, consulted on, and replaced at least every 5 years. But if a development charges bylaw is scheduled to expire in the coming months, it would be difficult to replace during the COVID-19 outbreak. That's why we're proposing changes to the Development Charges Act that would allow municipalities to keep using their existing bylaw during this time. We want to ensure that municipalities can count on this important source of revenue for local infrastructure and services during the COVID-19 outbreak. Mr. Speaker, upon royal assent, both the changes we're proposing in this bill would come into effect. The Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing would then have the authority to make the necessary regulatory changes to the Planning Act to temporarily suspend specified timelines. The regulatory changes would be able to suspend timelines back to March 17, 2020. Once the provincially declared emergency has ended, the regular land use planning timelines would automatically come back into effect. And the Development Charges Act changes would apply for up to 6 months following the end of the emergency declaration. This would allow municipalities time to put in place a new development charge bylaw if needed. Mr. Speaker, we know these measures are necessary to help municipalities better manage staff time and resources so they can focus on the COVID-19 outbreak. Our proposals build on the package of support I spoke to last month that gives municipalities the ability to fully conduct council, local board, and committee meetings electronically during this time. And we will continue to work with our municipal partners to support our communities and keep Ontarians safe. I want to thank all of my colleagues in this chamber, the opposition parties, for supporting this important piece of legislation and for passing it quickly. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much. Further debate, the member for Davenport.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a really great pleasure to be here to speak both as the education critic for the official opposition and also on behalf of the people of my riding of Davenport. I want to start by thanking our healthcare workers and all of the other workers who are fighting COVID-19 on the front line and ensuring that Ontarians get the essential services that they need, and others here have already spoken about that. I also want to acknowledge, though, the incredible work that all Ontarians are doing, whether you're just staying inside or you're caring for your kids and juggling work, or also just finding ways to check in on others. I have noticed myself, and I know many of us in our communities across the province have noticed the incredible work that's happening to support Ontarians and fill in all of those gaps as we see in this crisis the enormous inequities that exist across our communities. We have already had, Mr. Speaker, a year of quite significant uncertainty in education. And now with the threat of COVID-19 and the closure of schools, we know how hard this is for students, for families, and for education workers. Mr. Speaker, I'm hearing from students who are nervous about what this means for the academic year and their prospects for post-secondary education and for the courses they're going to take next year at high school. I spoke this morning with representatives from the Ontario Student Trustees Associations, and they talked about the impact this uncertainty is having on the mental health of students, not to mention, of course, the impact of social isolation and healthcare fears. They're asking for more consistent communication from government and from school boards. Many parents as well, and I know they've reached out to others in this House, have reached out to me with worries about the expectations being placed on them. Are they meant to run a full programmed day school at home? Parents of students with special needs, Mr. Speaker, are left without the resources and, frankly, the respite they need to support their kids fully. And so many parents are either juggling work from home or worrying about the impact of lost employment on their future and their ability to care for their families. Teachers and education workers, we want to thank you as well. We know that teachers have been keen to adapt and connect with their students, but they're also facing these challenges. There are questions about privacy. There are questions about access to technology and how to best support our students in the home. And they're doing that while they're also juggling the pressures of home life or healthcare issues. I know that many, many teachers out there and others in our education system are thinking about the 1 or 2 students that they have not been able to connect with. And I know how that weighs on them, and I want to thank them for all they're doing. There are also the occasional teachers and the other staff who have lost employment altogether, and the aspiring teachers, as my colleague mentioned previously, who are facing barriers related to the troubling rollout of the math proficiency test. Mr. Speaker, I've appreciated the opportunity to meet with the Minister of Education and have phone briefings and to have raised some of these issues previously. I want to encourage the Minister to continue to listen to parents, to create an opportunity and a space for student voice to also be considered as we move forward. And what is lacking in this legislation, Mr. Speaker, and we will be supporting it, as we said, but this is a lost opportunity. We have an opportunity here to actually think a little bit more about what the coming school year is going to mean, the kind of remediation that's going to be necessary, and the kind of resources that need to be there for our students. This is essential that we consider this in this moment, because there's a lot of work to be done. Our students, our teachers, our families are counting on us. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Further debate, the member for Northumberland, Peterborough South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's an honour to rise today to speak to this important piece of legislation and to make the drive on what were eerily quiet 401 highways into the legislature this morning. Before I begin, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to take this opportunity to join my colleagues, many of whom have thanked their frontline workers in their riding, especially given the agriculture nature of my riding of Northumberland, Peterborough South, the grocery store workers who time in and day out are going in and making sure that folks in my community have the food that they need, and of course to our remarkable farmers throughout Northumberland, Peterborough South. Farmers quite literally feed cities, and I think they're showing it true to form in this COVID-19 pandemic and working exceptionally hard to ensure that we have the food we need as a community. Also, Mr. Speaker, to our frontline workers, with a specific shout out to our healthcare workers. You know, in so many of the communities that define Northumberland, Peterborough South, we've seen the remarkable outpouring of support, people going to their windows, putting up signs, our first responders going through the neighbourhood with sirens going, thanking the frontline workers, our healthcare workers who are quite literally on the front lines of what the Premier referred to earlier as an invisible enemy. So heartfelt on behalf of myself, the colleagues who came to the legislature here and our government, to the men and women on the front lines, our healthcare workers and our first responders, and everybody who's working hard on the essential services list in Northumberland, Peterborough South. Thank you very much. Every one of us, Mr. Speaker, understands the importance of today's legislation and the need for all MPPs to come together. We know the challenges of COVID-19, the challenges they present to our communities and to our province. I'm proud of the actions that our government has taken to support all Ontarians, Mr. Speaker. Under the leadership of Premier Ford and Deputy Minister and Minister of Health Christine Elliott, Ontario has taken the necessary steps to ensure the continued health and well-being of Ontarians. We understand that things like social distancing aren't always easy, but they are necessary for us to flatten the curve. Our actions have been and continue to be made on the advice of Ontario's Chief Medical Officer of Health and the COVID-19 response table, and I continue to have faith in their leadership and guidance as we collectively navigate these uncharted waters together. I'd like to thank members of my community of Northumberland, Peterborough South, who are working tirelessly and reaching out to their neighbours, delivering groceries for those in need or those who, for accessibility reasons, are unable to leave their house. Thank you for reaching out. Thank you for coming together as a community and lending a helpful hand. As a parliamentary assistant to the Minister of Colleges and Universities, I'm proud to be able to speak to our ministry's portion of COVID-19 Supports and Protections Act and amendments to the Training Colleges and University Act. Since the beginning of this outbreak, Minister Romano has been working tirelessly to advocate on behalf of our students, our faculty, and our post-secondary institutions across the province. He and I have joined a number of calls across the province, been on phones well into the evening. I know the minister's been speaking with our colleges, our universities, our post-secondary sector, and our students. We've been speaking with them, Mr. Speaker, so that we can identify their particular areas of need and find ways to support them during these uncharted times. Mr. Speaker, we've seen the innovative spirit, the ingenuity, and the response from our post-secondary sector to COVID-19. It's been truly remarkable. From the development of masks and other PPEs, to reaching out and offering residences that are going unused at this moment to support the men and women who are on the front lines, our healthcare workers or those in self-isolation. Our colleges and universities have stood up to support Ontarians during these times. And while we look forward to discussing our ongoing commitment to support our post-secondary institutions, today I'd like to talk about action we are taking to support the foundation of our sector, Mr. Speaker, the students. Our government understands that our students make great sacrifices to attend colleges and universities. In fact, Mr. Speaker, there's no greater investment into one's future than into their education. And that's why, Mr. Speaker, that we understand that in light of the COVID-19, OSAP borrowers need relief. I've spoken to a number in our community over the past number of weeks. And that's why our ministry has introduced a 6-month deferral of OSAP payments, including stopping the accrual of interest on these loans for a 6-month period. This will automatically apply to loans currently in good standing from March 30th through to September 30th, 2020. I want to again reiterate, Mr. Speaker, this is important clarification. No applications, Mr. Speaker, no approvals, no paperwork. Just immediate support to the OSAP borrowers and students in this province during their time in need. I know all members of this legislature can agree that while a simple step, this action will go a long way to providing immediate relief across the province. Now more than ever, we need to ensure that our policies lift each other up and provide relief to those that need it. In addition, Mr. Speaker, Minister Romano and our ministry have been working diligently on digital learning, online exam proctoring, and grading tools for our educators to ensure that our students' continuity of education for our post-secondary students. Immediate investment, Mr. Speaker, of over $25 million to institutions to allow them the flexibility to respond to their local needs. Our post-secondary institutions, colleges and universities are pivotal, are monumental to the footprint of the broader communities, are instrumental in the overall economy of the towns, cities that they're situated in. And so providing that immediate relief and flexibility to allow them to be responsive was a critical and important step this government's made, and a direct response to conversations well into the evening that the minister has had and I have had across the sector and across the province over the past number of weeks. Mr. Speaker, in closing, the deferral of OSAP is supporting our students when they need it most. I know that as we gather at this legislature and as we work together with one goal in mind, to support Ontarians during these uncharted times, and as we gaze to the future on additional supports that we can take, I know our universities and colleges will be instrumental in that process. I'd like to thank them for the work that they do. I'd like to thank our students, our future. I'd like to tell you that you have a government that is here to support you, and we're working across the sector to continue to provide the necessary supports for our students during these challenging times. I know my time is running short, so in closing, I'd like to again thank everyone in the legislature for being here today. Again, reiterate my thanks to the frontline workers and all of our essential workers in Northumberland, Peterborough South, and around the province. Because no matter where Ontarians are in the province, or colour or political stripe, we're all a part of Team Ontario, Mr. Speaker. We're all a part of Team Canada. So it's an honour to be here today, Mr. Speaker, and to say a few short remarks on steps our government is taking to support our post-secondary sector. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Further debate, the member for Brampton North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I also want to thank our first responders, the police, the firefighters, the healthcare workers, the PSWs, the RPNs for all the great work that they do. Now, when I decided to speak to this bill, as I mentioned before, we are going to support this bill, but there are some areas in this bill where we do have some concerns. Now, I could talk about law enforcement, I could talk about the firefighters, the ambulance workers, but I'm going to focus on one group that doesn't get a lot of attention, corrections workers. And this bill fails to address and rectify some of the problems of corrections workers. I've spoken to corrections workers over the last several weeks during this COVID-19, and Mr. Speaker, they've been—
People and families. Families are separated from their loved ones right now, and people are dying. My heart breaks for those who have lost their loved ones in long-term care homes. My friends, the sad truth is our long-term care homes are quickly turning into the front line of the fight against this virus. And my top priority right now is getting the troops and the resources needed to this front. We're going through everything we have at our long-term care homes, and tomorrow we will launch an enhanced action plan to fight COVID-19 in long-term care homes. Our plan will include more support and more resources. We will spare no expense to protect our most vulnerable. We must redeploy every available resources to our long-term care homes right now. It is absolutely critical. And thanks to our collective efforts, we've not seen the surge in our hospitals that we were so worried about. As a result, we have capacity within the health sector. And I want available resources from our health system to be redeployed to those homes when there is a serious outbreak. We need to get hospital-based care teams to help long-term care staff manage these outbreaks. And I want to see specialized teams deployed into long-term care homes when there's a serious outbreak. This is something that our officials are working on right now. And tonight, we'll issue a new emergency order that will ensure every employee in these long-term care homes can only work in one home. I want to thank the sector for helping us get to this point. Issuing this order today is only possible because we now have the staffing resources we need in place. That is why we allocated $243 million to help homes and staffing, testing, and operational needs. We are immediately directing funding to cover much needed additional staffing. There'll be more staff for the homes that need it most, and cover the cost of increasing hours for part-time staff. And we're prepared to spend more as required. We're also moving rapidly to enhance COVID-19 testing within the sector. This is a top priority. New infection control measures are being put in place immediately for all high-risk homes. Infection control specialists are going into the homes as we speak to enhance protocols to ensure the homes are prepared, to make sure everything possible is being done to isolate patients and prevent the spread. We're responding to most requests for new PPE within 24 hours. My friends, this is just the beginning. As Premier, I will do whatever it takes. I will spare no expense. I will leave nothing on the table when it comes to protecting our seniors and the most vulnerable. And I will do everything necessary to get more resources to the front lines, to support the brave men and women working in our long-term care homes right now. And I want to thank, from the bottom of my heart, those hardworking men and women who show up every day, who work for hours on end to protect the health of our loved ones. Every registered and practical nurse, every personnel support worker, every member of the cooking and cleaning staff, every volunteer. Your sense of duty is the true meaning of the Ontario spirit. You are our heroes on the front lines. You are in the trenches of this war, and we cannot win this battle without you. I want you to know this government has your back. We're using every tool available to us. We're redeploying every resource we have. And to the families out there who have grandparents, parents, siblings, or children in these homes, I want you to know we are here and we hear you loud and clear. We will overturn every rock, every boulder, if that's what it takes to protect our most vulnerable. Thank you. And God bless the people of Ontario.
The phone line for questions. First question.
First question comes from Mike Crawley at CBC News. Please go ahead.
Hi, Premier. I'm sure you're going to get a lot of questions about long-term care, but I just wanted to focus for the moment, though, on the issue of the testing going on in long-term care and some of the reports that we're having coming from public health units. So as part of this, are you going to mandate that everyone in long-term care is tested, as you've been saying you want to have happen? And is there going to be some sort of direction to the public health units to be transparent about deaths that are happening at long-term care? Because we're having a lot of public health units that are telling us that they will not say how many deaths are happening at specific long-term care homes because that information is confidential.
Well, I'll have to speak to him, Mike, about that. I know that we have 626 long-term care homes. 114 are infected right now. That's approximately 14%, and that's still too high, in my opinion. We have over 500 seniors homes, and there's 34 of those homes infected, about 5%. So I will follow up on that question. The other question yesterday, Mike, regarding the robocall. We immediately talked to the long-term care home. They said it was an accident. They said it was inconsiderate and it will never happen again. So for those folks that received that robocall from this long-term care home, we apologize. Plus, the long-term care homes are 80% are private homes, and we're going to support them every way we can.
Okay, and if I could put a question to Minister Elliott on another topic, which is about medications available for keeping patients on ventilators. I understand from a few of the medical people that I've spoken to at hospitals that there are concerns about the supply of sedatives and what are called paralytics to basically allow for patients to be put on ventilators. What is the province doing about this supply, and how concerned should we be about the limits on the supply of these drugs?
Well, we have been concerned about the supply of a number of drugs available on the market. That is one of the reasons why we put the 30-day prescription refills in, so that there would be medications for everyone. For the specific medications required for patients on ventilators, we're constantly sourcing new drugs. We're looking for the new ingredients for them from other countries. We're working with India in particular right now, and of course we're working with the pharmaceutical companies as well. They are giving us ideas of the supplies that they have, what else they need to have, and we're prepared to go and negotiate with other countries as well to get the active ingredients that we need in order to make these medications, because we know that there is going to be demand for them. So we continue to work on that as well.
Next question.
Next question comes from Christina Tenaglia from CP24. Please go ahead.
Hi, Premier. Thanks so much for taking my call. My first question is about your announcement, the order you're issuing tonight about long-term care home workers cannot work in more than one home. We know that across the province there had been a staff shortage, so suddenly why is there all these extra workers? I mean, are they coming from the health portal that was previously announced where, you know, workers can be matched with an employer? How are you confident that suddenly there's enough workers to meet the capacity in each of these 600 plus homes in the province?
Well, we're going to be reallocating resources. We haven't seen the surge that we thought would be in the hospital, but if you don't mind, I'm going to hand this over to the Minister of Health.
Well, we know that the order is going to be necessary, first of all, in order to make sure that there aren't any workers that are inadvertently carrying the virus from one location to another. This is really key to limiting the expansion of the virus in our long-term care homes. But we are also receiving, through the job matching application that was set up last week, thousands of applications from people who have been involved in healthcare, whether they're retired nurses, medical students, whether they're medical professionals from other countries, or other people who have the relevant care requirements. We have been matching a solid number of potential employees with long-term care homes. They've put in the most requests so far. So we can expand that workforce with these people coming in who have the skills and knowledge that we need in order to make sure that we can have our long-term care homes properly functioning with the right number of people.
Thank you, Minister. And Premier, I want to ask you about a potential extension to school closures. Today, you extended the province's emergency declaration until May the 12th. So, of course, just stating the obvious here, school's not going to open on May the 4th. I mean, at this point, that doesn't seem likely. When will you give parents, students, and teachers some certainty as to how long that extension will be in place in terms of the closure and, if school is going to extend potentially into the summer?
Yeah. Oh, good question, Christina. So school will not be going back on May the 4th, and the minister will be having, we'll be talking further on this in the next couple of days. But just to confirm, students will not be going back on May the 4th. That does not mean the year is canceled. Minister of Education will be out over the next couple of days.
Next question.
Next question comes from Travis Denrush of Global News. Please go ahead.
Hi there, Premier. The Prime Minister said this morning that he is willing to look at the possibility of providing provinces with funding to top up pay for long-term care workers and also for more hiring. Have these conversations happened with the federal government, and if so, what kind of timeline are we looking at in order for this to happen?
Yes, that conversation took place with the Prime Minister along with the Deputy Prime Minister, and we're reviewing that. I know Quebec has taken them up on that offer, but we'll review it. And maybe when it comes to the financial side, I'll pass it over to my Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Travis, for the question. So yes, there have been discussions led by the premiers and the Prime Minister about what needs to be done. Obviously, as we've discussed, there are going to be financial implications for workers if they're only able to work in one location. The other reality, and this was acknowledged by what Quebec did, was that the federal government's program that is paying $2,000 a month inadvertently put pressure on that sector where, particularly in the case of Quebec, many of those workers were making less than that. So we have been involved in those conversations. I've been in communication with Minister Morneau today about it, and we will obviously bring that forward. But the main point, and I think the Premier's made this, is we will make sure that the support's in place for those vital workers who are doing the work that needs to be done and staying at their posts in the long-term care homes.
And my next question is for Minister Elliott. Minister, Global News has obtained documents from Toronto Public Health and also a directive from Dr. David Williams that states staff in long-term care homes that test positive for COVID-19 may return to work if they are asymptomatic. Why are we allowing workers who may still be able to pass on the virus into facilities with the most vulnerable?
Well, we're still concerned about that. It's only recently that we found out that you can be asymptomatic but still be able to transmit the virus. So that is something that we're studying very carefully because we don't want any more long-term care residents to become infected with this. So we have to be particularly careful. That would be something that I would be very concerned about as a province-wide strategy.
Next question.
Next question comes from Cynthia Mulligan from City TV. Please go ahead.
Hi, Premier. This is about, long-term care workers and PPEs. I'm hearing that they're still not all getting PPEs. And these are the people that are in very close contact with residents. We know it's spreading like wildfire, as you said. They're bathing them, they're changing them. Why aren't all
staff in long-term care homes getting PPEs?
Well, I can tell you the report I got back was within 24 hours, and especially more local ones. Now, one's a little further distance. I think it took an extra day. But every single PPE item that we have within 24 hours of a phone call, we have it over there. If you have the home's name, you can contact me later, and I'll follow up on it, because there's been very, very strict instructions that they get the PPE that they need. And I've followed up on it, and they told me within 24 hours they have this PPE over there. So I'd really like to know. I'd like to follow up on the homes.
Okay.
Or home.
And going forward, do you think that this is a change that should be permanent, that long-term care workers can only work in one home and be paid a salary so they can survive on that instead of working part-time hours in multiple homes?
This is just a personal view, and I have to rely on our chief medical officer and our health team. Personally, yes. My heart breaks for these people. They deserve every penny, 10 times more than that as well. But again, that's my personal opinion. I will take the advice from our chief medical officer and the team and long-term care as well.
Next question.
Next question comes from Randy Rath at CHCH-TV. Please go ahead.
Hi, Premier. I have a question about long-term care facilities. We're doing a story today on Anson Place in Hagersville. They have 50 cases, 15 deaths. Again, the workers there say that there is a severe shortage of PPE. And also the families of people that are in there are wondering why their loved ones aren't being transferred to hospitals where they think they could be more properly treated.
Well, first of all, my heart breaks for the people that lost loved ones. I will follow up to make sure that they have the PPE that they require. And regarding the transfer, I'll pass it over to the Minister of Health.
Well, certainly if people need to be in hospital because of COVID-19, they will be transferred there. But in some cases, I recognize that for some smaller homes where there are 4 people to a room, it's really difficult to self-isolate someone with even a mild case of COVID-19 from the other residents. So it may be necessary to transfer that person to hospital where they can be self-isolating, and that's for their own protection and for the protection of all of the other residents as well. It really does depend on the home itself, on the geographic location to hospital, but rest assured, if people need to be in hospital because of COVID-19 for a long-term care home, they will be taken to hospital.
Okay, my next question, I'm wondering about the finances of municipalities. The societal lockdown has deprived cities of a lot of revenue streams. Hamilton is predicting a $22 million loss in revenues by the end of May. Municipalities can't run deficits. Is that going to change, and is the province going to bail the cities out?
Well, I've heard that not only about Hamilton, but I heard it about Toronto. Just on the TTC alone, they're losing tens of millions of dollars every single day. But again, when it comes to finances, I'm going to hand it over to my Minister of Finance.
Randy, thank you for the question. Steve Clark, our Minister of Municipal Affairs, has been in touch with municipalities. Obviously, we are all working our way through this, and some of the services that they continue to provide, like transit, for example, are very important for many reasons, but including making sure that our vital frontline workers can get to work. So we will be working with municipalities as we have already. We transferred about $250 million to them directly as part of our initial program, and we'll continue to have those conversations, continue to work with communities around the implications, both in this phase of addressing the crisis and also as we look at the recovery.
Next question.
Next question comes from Sean Jeffords from the Canadian Press. Please go ahead.
Premier Ford, I'm wondering if you can say definitively if this will be the last extension of the declaration of the state of emergency for the province, and if not, what you might say to people who see this pass today and feel discouraged or frustrated by that.
Well, the number one priority, this is a health crisis, and I'm not going to jeopardize people's health to open up the floodgates. I'm just not going to do it until we start seeing the curve go down, and it's absolutely essential that we continue on with the path that we're going. And I got to thank the people of the province of Ontario, the 14.5 million people that followed the protocol about self-isolating and social distancing. That's the reason we're in better shape. And I always say better, and it's nothing's great, but we're in much better shape at our hospitals and our acute care areas than we ever thought we'd be at right now. But all the thanks goes to the people, the residents of Ontario, that were able to stay self-isolated, and that's the reason we're doing fairly well on the hospital side. And I always describe it as, you know, we have some bushfires, but we have an inferno happening at long-term care, and we're going to put every single resource we can to make sure that we focus on the long-term care right now.
And Premier, on long-term care, the Registered Nurses Association of Ontario has been asking the province specifically to limit the number of homes nurses, healthcare workers can work in for weeks now. I'm wondering why it's taken so long to move on this, and is it too late to make a difference here?
I feel it's never too late. Now, keep in mind, over the last few weeks, we had to make sure our hospital's ready, acute care area was ready, and the infectious area of the hospital, that they had the resources now. I'm sorry, the infection control personnel, I should say, within the hospital. Right now, it looks pretty good in the hospitals, but again, we have to make sure that we have the resources before we made the move on this one item. We feel we have the resources to back it up and take the advice off our Chief Medical Officer, and that's why we decided to make a move now. It's critical that we get in there and help the people at long-term care.
Last question.
Last question comes from Siobhan Moore from News Talk 1010. Please go ahead.
Hi, Premier. This is really a takeoff on Sean's question. I think not even over the last number of weeks, you've heard since the days post-SARS that, you know, this idea of people working in multiple homes was a real danger. So in really the epicenter of the SARS outbreak, why did we not learn the lesson of that outbreak and apply it to this one?
That's a very, very good question. Right now, I'll tell you, we didn't have the staffing available to go to the 626 long-term care homes. And now we feel we can reallocate some staffing up there to support the long-term care. So, and we took the advice off our Chief Medical Officer to make the move now.
Okay, and just on another subject, do you see any need at this point to put buying limits on some grocery items? I'm thinking of beef in particular because of the shutdown of a plant in Alberta, and we've heard that that's going to limit the availability of beef in some grocery stores.
Yeah, well, again, that's going to be up to the retail folks. They measure the numbers. They know exactly how much they go through, and I haven't heard from them yet. And that's going to be strictly up to the people that run the retail chains. I know that we have one beef company, the last one in Toronto, St. Helens. They're working around the clock to make sure they supply as much as they can to the retail stores. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.